Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Amy.
Our project is called Mind, Body, and Soul, the Nature of Well-Being, and this podcast is just one small piece of the overall project. We are making a documentary that follows our hike on the Continental Divide Trail that will explore how spending time in nature affects a person's mental, physical, and spiritual well-being.
We are guinea pigs in a sense because we will be documenting our own experiences and recording changes that we find. Along the way, we are interviewing people about their experiences in nature to see how they have been affected.
Much of the benefits that come from being in nature are subjective, and therefore hard to measure in a quantifiable way. That's why we have turned to recording stories as a way to distribute this knowledge. Since the beginning of human culture, we have compressed valuable information into stories, and that's how we have shared wisdom throughout the generations.
We hope that the stories we gathered during this project will help spread some of the wisdom that can be found in the wilderness. Episode 20, Part 1 of 3, an interview with Robin Henderson on life as a Zen Hermit Monk. In a world dominated by constant stimulation and digital distractions, Robin chose a radically different path, one of silence, solitude, and simplicity. For 100 days, he lived alone deep in the wilderness on a meditation retreat, fully immersed in the practice of Zen. As a modern hermit monk, Robin stepped away from the noise of society to explore the inner landscapes of his mind and soul. In this rare and intimate interview, he shares his experiences, insights, and the challenges of living without the comforts and distractions of modern life. To learn more about Robin, we will leave a link in the description where you can find his blog.
My name's Robin Henderson. We're in Olympia, Washington. Specifically, we're in Priest Point Park, which is on the outskirts of town, and that's where we are.
And you basically grew up here?
Yeah. My family is from here from way on back. We've been here since the 19th century.
So what do you do for a living?
Well, there's what I do for a living and there's what I do. What I do is I'm a Zen Hermit Monk. And what I do for a living is whatever I can find that puts enough rice and beans in my bowl to keep me monking.
All right, let's get into the Zen Hermit Monk. Give us a brief definition, yeah.
Well, most people, when they hear the word monk, they think of a person who sits in a monastery with other monks. That's a relatively new innovation on the concept of monk. By relatively, I mean it's only a couple of thousand years old. Prior to that, a monk was a person who sat alone, or prayed alone, depending on the religion. Monking was a solitary thing that was done. And at a certain point, the gatekeepers in the various societies got nervous. There was a little too much independence. So they came up with this notion that to be a monk, you had to get permission to do it, and everybody had to sit in the same building. So they invented the concept of monastery, which is a rather interesting word that means a place where people are alone together. The word monk means solitary. It's the same root as mono, one. So a monastery is a place where people are all by themselves together. And we hermits have gone on existing. We've always existed because some of us just don't take to that collective life. And but after they invented the monastery, we started to get called mean names because the monasteries didn't relish the competition. And so today, that's still the case in Buddhism, which is my religion, in Christianity, in all of the religions that have monasticism. As far as I know, there are still hermits and there are still monastery monks, but hermits generally have a reputation for being a little crazy, a little weird, which I don't dispute, by the way. But these days, when you hear the word hermit, we had to come up with another word for us when the monastery monks took the word monk. So the word was hermit. The adjective is eremitical. I'm an eremitical monk, meaning I'm a hermit. And then, sure enough, after a while, that got to have connotations. You know, it started to be, when you say hermit to somebody, they think of a crazy old man who's crotchety and never bathes and lives in the woods. And I've always objected to that because I'm not that crotchety. But yeah, so these days hermit still has its negative connotations, or at least its strange connotations. But we're still there. The Buddha himself was a hermit. Christ went through a hermit period, his famous 40 days and nights in the wilderness. So we're still out there.
Did all this originate in India?
Buddhism did. And as I say, the Buddha was himself a hermit, and the first Buddhists for several centuries were hermits. The only Buddhist monks recognized in Buddhist scripture are hermits, which is funny because these days, if there were other Zeners around and I said I was a Zen Hermit Monk, they would say, he's also a liar. So it's funny how human beings are, you know, that we were founded by a hermit, that for the first many centuries all Buddhist monks were hermits. And then same thing happened in Buddhism that happened in Christianity. We started to get collected into these monasteries. And then there were teachers who had authority and made their living off that authority. So they don't like us running around out there being independent monks.
Yeah, you kind of answered my next question of like, why is this like a dangerous thing? Why do hermits kind of get a bad name?
Well, you know, the thing is, the criticisms of eremitical monasticism are not untrue. They say things like, well, just anybody could call himself that. And you don't know if he's really practicing. You don't know if he could even be dangerous to other people. Okay, that's true. It's also completely true of the monastery. I was inside for a while myself, and I don't hate the time that I spent inside. If I found a monastery I liked, I'd probably just settle down there and spend the rest of my life there. But there's plenty of harm going on in there as well. I had some experiences with clerical abuse in the monastery, which is why I'm not there now. And it wasn't just me, there were others. And so that's my response to the criticism of eremitical monasticism. It's not that it's untrue, it's that what else you got? Because the alternative is not an alternative in the sense of you can rely on the people in there to be honest monks, because most of them are, and some of them aren't, and the ones that aren't tend to be the ones that rise to the top, because that's how it is in humanity. It's the psychopaths that are running the rest of us everywhere, and the people that are the most damaged are the ones that also run the monasteries. So I guess the bottom line is, if you're a hermit monk who's very damaged, at least the good news is you're out in the middle of nowhere where you're not going to be hurting anyone else.
So is that, do you think, somebody who's not damaged, who's got it all figured out, and they're a good person, they just don't aspire to that kind of power?
I'm not going to say they never do. You know, I'm not at war with teachers either. I'm definitely at war with gurus, with people who say, follow me and I will bring you enlightenment, since that goes in direct contradiction of the teachings of my religion. But yeah, it is a little strange that you're a Buddhist, you're practicing a religion that teaches that the work of a human life is rejecting attachment and rejecting worldly temptation. And here you are climbing this rather grueling ladder in Zen of teacherhood, which it's very military. It's the Zen establishment is remarkably similar to the army. And just as in the army, you get officers, even generals who are good soldiers and good people and haven't forgotten what the mission is, but we all know you also get officers who have utterly forgotten the mission. And the same thing is true in establishment Zen.
Yeah, I guess it's any form of power structure, something like that.
And Zen teachers have ultimate power. When you're a monastery monk, you basically sign your life over to those people. And if you don't think that's a temptation for the people who get that kind of fealty, you haven't been a human for long. My teacher, I think, had gone off the rails. And she's not the only one. If you follow Zen issues, every week is another scandal, you know, and the sexual ones are just the ones that get reported. The non-sexual ones in this culture fly under the radar because we're only interested in sex here. But my my teacher, to the very best of my knowledge, was never guilty of any kind of sexual misconduct. And if somebody had told me she was, I would insist on some very persuasive evidence, because I'm very certain that she wasn't. At the same time, she was guilty of some other kinds of abuse that weren't sexual, but from my reading, just as dangerous. And as I say, I'm not alone. I had all of us senior students, not all of us, most of us, ended up leaving that place because of the abuse.
You think it's kind of a almost necessary evil, because do there have to be teachers?
It's funny you should ask that. The Buddha himself said no. In the very first sermon he ever delivered, he said, I had two teachers. One of them was a hermit monk, oh snap, and the other one was a meditation teacher. And he thanked them for their service and for the great benefit that they were to him, and then said neither of them were necessary. So yeah, the whole teacher thing is Confucian. It's a different religion, and one that is not compatible with Buddhism, as far as I'm concerned. Zen is an amalgam of three Asian religions: Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. And Confucianism, as far as I'm concerned, definitely doesn't belong in there. And I think all the problems we have in institutional Zen comes from Confucianism, which is essentially ancestor worship. It's the worship of human authority. And that's Taoism. I mean, we could argue whether or not Buddhism and Taoism make good roommates, but Confucianism definitely doesn't. Here in the West, we have what's called Western Zen, which is a new version of the religion. It tends to downplay Confucianism or remove it entirely and replace it with atheism. And that brings in a whole nother set of possible conflicts. An atheist religion is an interesting concept.
Okay, so why don't we go there?
Sure.
What do you think about atheism?
You know, I've got nothing against atheists. I can easily see where that would be a strong and valuable spiritual position to take. At the same time, I have difficulty with people that claim to be walking a Zen path. Zen is a religion, but they say they're doing it as an atheist. An atheist is a person who doesn't believe that there's anything that exists that we can't see and understand ourselves. And that doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me in my life. Having said that, I need to rush to point out that I have nothing against Western Buddhists that practice that kind of Zen. Their path is perfectly valid. I learn a lot. It's called secular Buddhism in the West. That's called secular Buddhism. And I learn a lot from those people. And I very much appreciate that they won't take any malarkey off gurus, because they're very dog-faced about that. And that's all great. I've got good friends that are secular Buddhists. I got good friends that are in the monastery. You know, it's just where I start to get uncomfortable is when people start insisting that this is the real Buddhism and nothing else is the real Buddhism. When the actual teaching is that all of our paths are our own, and they're absolutely vital, and they're treasures that we all have to honor. And I would say we have to honor those treasures in others as well, their paths as well. I learn so much from people that aren't walking my path. That's one of the strengths of being a hermit. There are very few of us around. So the people who influence me are almost always not hermits. And I think that's one of the great strengths of my path. It prevents me, or maybe prevent is too strong a word, it helps to keep me from wandering off on this arrogant ego trip, which is the great danger of the hermit path. In the monastery, you've got plenty of people kicking the ego out of you all the time. If it's a Zen monastery, they may literally be kicking the ego out of you all the time. And that's the great strength of the monastery. The downfall, as I mentioned earlier, is you've got this big ego that's running you, and it's not your ego. The great strength of the hermit path is that you're free to accept truth and insight wherever it comes from. And that is something that I absolutely cherish. The danger is where your own ego can lead you when you don't have people around you saying, have you noticed you've gone crazy? That's what happened to me on Ongo. I got a little bit crazy on Ongo. And fortunately, I had my meditation practice, and frankly, my monastery training. My monastery training was very, very useful when I was out there in the jungle all by myself and doing crazy things. And I had a voice that would say, "You've got a little bit nuts here," to pull me back into the middle.
Okay. Is Ongo your 100-day retreat?
Yeah, 100 days on the mountain.
We'll definitely get to that in a minute. You said something about how some people think that their path in Buddhism is like the only path, and I don't think that's unique to Buddhism. That's all religions for sure.
It's all religions, and it happens because religion is human. There are certain known bugs in the OS that we humans are all running, and that's definitely one. We despise difference in other people. And it doesn't matter where you go in the world, they're always trying to make everybody the same, and it's an absolutely futile thing to even attempt. Most of us, I don't know about you, maybe I should only speak for myself, but I tend to hate myself sometimes. I find that I'm not conforming to me sometimes, and I can get into, circles where I'm arguing with myself, or I'm feeling a lot of guilt or shame because I haven't been able to do what I think I should do. And what's going on is there's more than one of me inside my skull. So when you move that out into the world, it's just orders of magnitude worse and worse and worse, depending on how many other people there are in the room that you identify with.
Mm-hmm. I think that was something that we had to deal with on the hike a little bit, because most hikers on the CDT are very adamant about getting from Mexico to Canada and doing 20 to 30 miles a day, and that's all that matters. And for us, those were lower on our priority list, I guess. And I definitely fell into that pattern of trying to be like everybody else. And we both had to remind ourselves that that's not exactly why we're out here.
And your ego needs it. You need to be able to tell other people, I walked straight through. And it's like me on my 100 days. I was terrified that I'd have to come off the mountain and tell people, I sat 97 days. It's not as cool as 100. Right? And I had to keep reminding myself, because I got into trouble out there, and at one point I was afraid I might have to leave and not finish, and I had to tell myself, this is the life you're living, this is the path. If you're forced off this path, that means you've been forced onto another one. You're not pathless now. You've just been forced onto a new path, and the whole point of Zen is accepting your karma. And boy, do I have trouble with that. I got ideas about what I should be, what I should get, what I should do. These ideas of either what I've earned and what others owe me, or the shame I feel over failure that I think that I've had, and it is so difficult as a human being just to say, okay, now this is happening. That's the Zen ideal. I don't know whether anybody ever actually gets there. I'm here to tell you, I've been doing this for 20 years, and sometimes it feels like I have never done this before, in terms of how upset I can get over dumb stuff. I can't find my sunglasses. I yell and scream obscenities, and it's like, Rob, that's not what you do. That's not what you do. But that's the voice that I've cultivated in 20 years, is the voice that says, this isn't what you do. So that's more than I had 20 years ago.
Okay. How are you able to recognize the correct path? If you want to go this way, but life is telling you to go this way, how do you recognize that?
One thing that really helps is mindfulness, awareness. 20 years of meditation have really helped me to be aware of when I'm walking down paths that I've walked down a million times before, and I know they go nowhere. Before I became a monk, my life was just nothing but cul-de-sacs and talking myself into doing things that making mistakes I'd already made 100 times, and I knew it wasn't going to work. But no, this time, and I would have a whole argument. No, see, everything's different now. This isn't, it's like the Iraq War. No, this isn't Vietnam. Now, you two are too young to remember this, but that was Vietnam. And it was obvious the day that it happened. And I had this argument with people my age saying, this is Vietnam, guys. We've seen this. This is going to end with the helicopters flying off the rooftops and people hanging off the runners, just like Vietnam. And I had friends of mine who were on the right side of the question insist, no, this is completely different. And I thought, I was a monk at that time, and I thought, I remember that. I remember when you just really want to believe something, that you just turn your back on the facts. And that's what meditation has been really useful for me for doing. It doesn't prevent me from making mistakes or even making the same mistake a lot, but what it does empower me to do is to look at that path, turn around, look back down the path I just walked and go, oh, it's that again. And that is what I didn't have before. I didn't have the ability to bust out of those poisonous cycles before I became a monk.
So let's back up a little bit here and maybe tell me how you even started going down this path of Zen in the first place. Because, I mean, I'm sure when you were a kid, you were probably just an average kid going down the average life path. Like, what kind of changed your direction?
I don't think anybody ever used the word average to describe me. They used a lot of other words. Most of them weren't that nice, but I wouldn't call myself average. I've never felt like I was the same as everybody else. I've never felt like I fit in. And I think most hermits, if you asked them, that's probably true of most of us. And frankly, a lot of the people in the monastery are like that too. So to answer your question about what got me into this, I had a well-disastered life. I made mistakes that ended up hurting me badly. I never really, as a kid, got the kind of adult mentorship that a person with my personality needs. I don't necessarily fault the adults in my life for that. It's just that I'm that weird. And I was born with an incredibly developed sense of empathy, which has led me into all kinds of dangerous places in terms of getting used by some people or getting myself into situations following my sense of empathy that I wasn't equipped to deal with, where I could have used a mentor to tell me, that's not how you do empathy, Rob. But people, they just didn't know what to do with me. So anyway, the bottom line is, by the time I reached the age of 40, I had gotten hurt badly enough in my life in various ways, contracted a sweet little case of PTSD, some other things, that I just reached the point where I realized that if I didn't find something to help make some sense of this, something to help illuminate a path that would be healing, I was going to end up jumping off a chair. I mean, it was that, and it came down to that. I'm either going to... I had dabbled in Zen a little bit as a young man, as a teenager and a college kid. I had dabbled in it a little bit. I didn't have enough money to afford counseling, and so I thought, well, there was that Zen thing I did when I was a teenager that seemed to bear a certain amount of fruit, and maybe I should try that again. In the meantime, the internet had happened, which was great because the internet is full of Zen teaching. Like everything else on the internet, there's a lot of caveat emptor there. You have to be careful because it's not always necessarily all good stuff. But a lot of the good Zen teachers in the world, their stuff is available online. And so that was very helpful. Anyway, I decided I can jump off a chair now and I'll never know if the Zen might have worked. Or I can do the Zen, and if that doesn't work, the chair's still there. And what ended up happening was almost immediately when I started practicing Zen, a lot of the nonsense that I was living just kind of cleared. I mean, I remember the first time that I meditated was a disaster. I did not meditate well because I mentioned the internet. I got information on the internet that was not good information. It turns out to be, you'll enjoy this story. In Buddhist scripture, there's a place where the Buddha says, he's telling people how to meditate. And he says, when I first started being a monk, I was told to meditate this way. You sit down, you clamp your tongue against the roof of your mouth, and you force all thoughts out of your head. And if a thought comes along that you don't like, or any thought at all, because you're supposed to be clearing your mind, you bear down and you force it out. And this is about a page of scripture in the sutras, where the Buddha describes what he was taught to do. It goes on for a page, and then you turn the page and he says, don't do that. That doesn't work. And there are a lot of people in the world Buddhists, who will tell you that that's how to meditate, because they hadn't turned the page. It's as simple as that. So after that first, I tried that. I was trying to force the thoughts out of my head, and after 15 minutes of that, I was exhausted. I had a headache. I thought, boy, this didn't work at all. And then I thought, but you know, that's not what people that are really into Zen describe. So I went back to the internet and I looked again. And this time I found the teaching from the Zen teacher. I don't know where in the world he was or she was. The teaching that said, you'll often hear people tell you to meditate like this. They didn't turn the page. You turn the page and the Buddha says, don't do that. And I went, well, thank you. I didn't read far enough, you know. And he says, what you do is you accept. You sit on the cushion and whatever happens, you accept. And you're trying to clear your mind. So when thoughts drift into your head, you say, all right, you can leave now. And you just let them drift out. And if you sit for an hour and the whole time you're redecorating your dorm room from college, you know, in your head, and you realize you've sat for an hour and you haven't cleared your mind once, you clear your mind. And when I started to get that kind of teaching, it worked. And the second time that I meditated was a time that in just 15 minutes I went, holy God. And I'd been a little bit, maybe even a lot, suicidal throughout most of my life. When I was a young man, teenager, I was very, I would say that I was in danger. I had been in danger, and I was lucky that that didn't happen. And my first thought after that second 15 minutes of meditation, doing it properly, was to almost pass out thinking, I never would have got here. If I'd done that. I remember being a teenager at one point being like 24 hours from doing what I decided to do. My friends could see that I was behaving strangely and just never left me alone. And they saved my life. And my first thought on the cushion was, I never would have reached this point. And that's when all of my suicidal impulses went away. They just went away. I mean, the impulses are still there because it's an impulse, it's a habit, it's a thought habit. But now I have a second voice that goes, yeah, that's not going to solve anything. You know, I'm a Buddhist. You just, bam, you're just right back here again. Because it's like Groundhog Day. You can try every possible way you could think of to kill yourself and you're right back here again. There's only one way out, and that's not it. And I realized that the first time that I meditated successfully. I realized there's a whole wing of existence out there. The universe is this huge place and I'm this tiny little dot. And there's so much that I don't know. I didn't learn any of it. You don't learn any of that meditating. All you learn is you don't know anything. And that was such an important lesson for me. So that's how it happened. I became a monk at that point. I said, that's it. This is what I'm doing for the rest of my life. And I have been doing that ever since that moment.
So why is that inspiring to understand that the universe is this huge place and you don't know anything? You don't know anything, you're not worth anything, and you don't matter. And for me it was, oh, thank you. You know, none of this matters. None of this matters, you know. And I've always had this sense that I need to be making the world a better place. Now, I haven't lost that sense. What I've lost is the sense that I know how to do that. So I was always tilting at windmills. And if you've read the book, Don Quixote tilts at the windmill, you know, his lance goes into the wind vane, it picks him up off his horse. Wind vanes are huge, I don't know if you've seen one, but they're huge. Takes him all the way to the top, he's like 4 stories high, and as he comes down, he drops from 4 stories and breaks like every bone in his body. He gets hurt very badly. That's what happens when you don't know what you should be doing. And in meditation, you're basically waiting. You sit there and you wait for insight. All right, what am I supposed to do? And that, to me, was much more valuable than the notion that, gosh, I'm so important that I have to get out there and help other people. I still believing in helping other people. I still believe that. But I know that I have to be modest about it. I have to be small about it and understand that I don't necessarily know what I'm doing, so that I don't, you know, rage around, usually getting myself hurt. I hurt myself a lot more than I hurt other people doing that, although I did hurt other people too. And that's another part of the practice is, thank God for the internet that happened in my mid-30s,
because now I can reach all of the people I knew in the past, including a lot of long-suffering ex-girlfriends, and say, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. And my girlfriends, almost all of them, were incredibly classy people. One thing I'm good at is I have very good taste in women. And it's really useful when you're a monk, let me tell you. But my ex-girlfriends were all very cool about it and said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I said, you are such a liar. But many of those ex-girlfriends are now my very closest friends. And I'm tearing up thinking about it because they're very dear to me.
Yeah, I think that says a lot when you can keep them in your life that way.
Well, I got that from Zen.
Yeah, when you say you want to help people, but you need to be small about it, I think that's a message that I think I've noticed a lot of people, especially in my generation, they all want to help the world, they all want to fix the world, and they all want to do good things, but they're just completely misled, or they're doing it wrong or something, because they think that the way to fix the world is by, like, I don't know, changing policy or something like that. But
sometimes it's about hurting other people. And that's something too, that you're not going to help the world by hurting other people. The problem with the world has never been that the right people haven't been hurt yet. And yet, especially today, we see on both sides of the political dialogue, that's kind of the prescription that we're hearing is, and here's one of the negative things about the internet, it has really supercharged that. The ability to hurt groups of people, the ability to hurt individuals very badly. You know, when I was young, I used to think of the metaphor of drawing the sword. And sometimes I can still kind of feel my hand reach. Fortunately, I come from the Scottish background, so that's where the drawing the sword comes from. And then I started practicing Zen, specifically Japanese Soto Zen. And sword drawing is not absent from that tradition either, to say the least. So I can still feel the hand reaching, you know, for the sword. And I've cultivated a Zen sense of put that back, put it back. It's always going to be there, but, you know, put it back, because you can't, as the Quakers say, you can't kill the devil with a gun or a sword. Those are the weapons that he uses. So,
how do you kill the devil?
Interestingly enough, Quakers and Zenners have come up with pretty much the same solution to that, which is you sit quietly and you wait for an answer. And one of the things that really works against evil that I've found is simply speaking. You don't have to shout, but you do have to say, yeah, that thing you just said there, that's not true. Because what ends up happening is good people, like we are, we get very intimidated by loud, angry people shaking their fist in the air, and we tend not to speak up. And I find that you can really, like with teachers, Zen teachers that are off the rails, what needs to happen is one or more of the senior students need to say, point of order, none of that is in Zen and none of that is in Buddhism. Now, they're not going to take it well. They're not going to take it well at all, and a few other students will get mad at you for having done that. But once you've said that, they're never going to get blind obedience in that room again. Not even from the other students that objected. Once you've pointed out, you've said, yeah, that's not really what Zen is, they're never going to get that kind of blind obedience. So that sort of thing is very, very, handy. I can give you a political example recently, the Me Too movement. Okay, once you've just had all of these sisters come out of the woodwork and say, yeah, that happened to me and that happened to me, and I had so many of my friends who were tweeting that too, that all by itself has already made it very difficult for misbehaving men to continue misbehaving. We don't actually really need corpses hanging, from the tree limbs. That isn't really what puts an end to it. What puts an end to it is just women refusing to be quiet about it anymore. And that's a very good example. I think that the Me Too impulse was very wise. People were really, really thinking about this, that the reason it keeps happening is that we've all been intimidated into being quiet about it. And I understand why women were like that prior to Me Too, because there were consequences. And some of them were very unpleasant. You lose your job, you get called names, you might get sued. You know, there were terrible consequences that were used to force those women to be silent. But once you've said it, it becomes very hard for that to keep happening.
That is kind of the humble way to go about it, is just say something, not get loud and raise your fists and everything, because that does kind of seem like that's the people that are driving the conversation for the most part now. It's the loud and angry people.
And you may well get hurt. Speaking the truth like that is, you know, you'll get hurt. But I was getting hurt the other way too. When you pull the sword, you'll get hurt doing that too. The difference is you haven't accomplished anything with the sword. You know, that's the difference. And it's all ego. I mean, you get to wave your sword around and make speeches, and everybody's looking at you as you tell them, this is what we should do. And we all want to be that guy, you know. But I don't think that that's the way forward for most of us. I think we all need leaders, but I don't think that's the way forward for most of us. It certainly never worked for me.
Become your own leader?
Yeah, or ideally, you know, it's the way that's your leader. I don't want to get all fruity and new agey about this, but, you know, the Taoists call it the Tao. It's what's going on. You just ride the waves. You just surf on it. It's easier said than done, but.
Well, I guess you can call that new agey and stuff, but we are kind of interested in that. we're trying to explore it and understand what that is. So what is the way? How would you describe that?
I don't know how much Zen literature that you've read, but at this point I'm supposed to throw hot tea on you, or yell at the top of my lungs, or do something crazy. Whenever anybody asks, what is the way? In the Zen literature, something dramatic and often painful always happens. You get hit over the head with the master's stick. The question of what is the way, I think, is the wrong question. You just let the way be the way. Again, I sound so much like a guru when I say stuff like that. I'm kind of turning my own stomach. But the truth is, the question really is not what is the way as much as it is what is my nature? What is the nature of my existence? What am I? Because the fact of the matter is, you do any amount of Zen meditation, you quickly find that you can't reach out and touch any part of you. I mean, there's a Zen koan that I like very much, where the teacher holds up a doll and says, "Where is the doll?" And everybody points at it. And he reaches up and breaks off a leg and puts the leg aside and says, "Where is the doll? Is it here or is it there?" And they point at the doll. And they keep doing this as he breaks off limbs. And finally he takes the doll and snaps the head off like this, and it's just a pile of parts, and he says, "Where is the doll?" And they don't know. See, so that's an example of what existence is. We are the interaction of parts. And somewhere in that interaction, there's something we call us. But good luck trying to put your finger on it, trying to point at it and say, that's me, that's me, that's me. It's like, you guys were just at the beach yesterday. Here's another Zen story similar to it, is when you look at the waves in the ocean crashing on the beach, where does the wave start and the ocean end? What was the wave before it was a wave, and what is it now that it's crashed on the beach? Is it gone? Was it gone before? Trying to figure that out will drive you crazy. That will drive you crazy, which is kind of the point. Where is the wave? What is the wave? What's the difference between the wave and the ocean? And yet, if someone were to come along and say, well, obviously there is no wave. Waves are a myth. Well, there's waves all over the place out there. The Western mind really rebels against this kind of thinking because we're very Aristotelian, where we believe in definitions. And we believe that things start in a certain place and end in a certain place, and they can be defined. This is the tree, that is not the tree. But the great Asian thinkers figured out 9,000 years ago that that's really not true. And it's disturbing. It's disturbing.
I mean, I feel my own brain just like going into chaos trying to answer that question.
Right. Where the hell did I come from? Yet another Zen question. What was your face before your grandmother was born? Is another Zen question. The Western mind says, well, there was no you before your grandmother was born. Well, then where did you come from? Now, Westerners will try to go into the whole thing with the sperm and the ovum and the zygote, but you're going to have to ask where those things came from. Well, that's my body. Well, where did your body come from? That's the same question as where did your mother's body come from? Is the same question as where did yours come from? And trying to differentiate those things from literally anything else in the universe becomes impossible. And when you sit with that idea on the cushion over and over and over and over again, it does things to your head that are hard to describe, but they're very positive things. It made such a change in me, even in my personality, that I just can't imagine living without it now.
Would you say it changes your outlook, just like the way that you interpret everything that you encounter?
Absolutely, and it makes everything little. It makes humanity incredibly small. One time I was sitting on the cushion, and thoughts are going to drift through your head. As far as I know, it's impossible to stop that. So, like I said, the game is just to let them go. But as they drift through, they'll sometimes drop an image. And I was sitting, and a thought drifted through my head of a planet, billions of light years from here. There is one out there. There are billions of them. There's a planet out there somewhere right now, and it has nothing to do with me, and will never intersect, but it's made of the same stuff that I'm made of. It's made of the same stuff everything is made of. It's part of everything, and it's so far out there that our telescopes can't see it, and probably never will. And that concept that I'm now sitting in a room with that planet, because it's there, it's still out there. Everything is still out there. It's impossibly larger than we are. And that is such an important lesson for people, how incredibly small we are. Is such an important, I think it's the nature, it's the root of morality, understanding how little you are.
So in civilization, you think about the average American's lifestyle, where we're so wrapped up in what's happening in civilization. And I think it does make you feel big, it makes you feel important, and all those things, because like that's your entire world. I think one way to get out of that is to go into nature, because then you kind of become a part of this bigger landscape or area. And then what you just described, thinking about the entire universe, that's like the next step.
That's exactly what the Buddha taught too. He said, go back out in the woods and sit. And that's what I did, and I discovered that is very good advice. It still works, in spite of what some people in some monasteries might tell you. The Hermetical path is still just as valid and just as powerful as it ever was. And that's it. What you mentioned is exactly what I found when I wasn't surrounded by other human beings, and I didn't have much in the way of possessions, and I wasn't even sleeping indoors anymore, and all that sort of thing. You're out there in a world that functions just fine, and has been functioning just fine for a long time, and it doesn't need you. And that's where you learn that I'm part of this. I'm all part of this. It's when you're surrounded by human beings and their accoutrements, it's easy to forget. You can believe there's some kind of difference between the forest and your kitchen. And when you go out in the forest and the forest is your kitchen, you go, oh, okay, I get it. It's really all the same thing. And you're not distracted. Humanity is the greatest distraction. Humanity is the greatest distraction. The one thing most meditators will tell you, like I can meditate with all kinds of sounds. I can meditate with a freeway next to me. I can meditate with a washing machine running, but I can't meditate with human voices. My brain is designed to focus on human voices, and it just is going to do that. That's my nature. It's the one kind of noise that I can meditate with children laughing, but I can't meditate with them talking to each other.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I have a very hard time not watching the TV if it's on.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me tell you what, if you watch TV and then sit down immediately and meditate, it's like an amusement park in your head. I've done this before because I like to meditate before bed, and there'll be some show on that I want to watch, and I watch a show like from 9 to 10, and then at 10 it's time to meditate. And I'll sit down on the cushion, and let me tell you how hard it is to meditate when you've just watched an hour of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Oh my God, and you spend the whole hour just trying to turn the TV off in your head, because those visual nerves, your brain was designed to engage with that, and trying to tell it, okay, we're not doing that now, is hard. They say that TV is one of the things that contributes to ADD. And I believe it. I've experienced that meditating after having watched television.
I believe that. I feel like I have ADD when I'm like trying to multitask and do something while the TV's on. Can't focus on anything.
Oh, and especially now. When I was a kid, there was less of that going on. But now with all the screens in our lives, we have the ability to do a million things at once. You couldn't in 1964. You couldn't do a million things at once. You could iron your clothes while watching television. That was it. That was multitasking in 1964. But now, you've got your friends texting you, and you've got the TV on, and you've got your computer that's telling you you've got emails, and then you throw in all the other stuff like your dogs and whether you're hungry, and boy, it's a real challenge today to turn that off.
So that's, I think, one of the most important things for me about going into nature is that I'm removing distractions from my life. I think that that's had some of the most profound effects just about being in nature, to be in a place where all you have is what's going on in your mind.
And the distractions are healthier out there too. You're distracted by weather patterns. You're distracted by wildlife. You're distracted by natural things that are going on that don't want anything from you. Because the human distractions are all trying to sell you something. We don't think of it that way, but they're all trying to get us to think a certain way or do a certain thing. When I was sitting on the cushion out in the jungle, and we have these large millipedes here that are shiny black with yellow. Have you seen them with the yellow skirts? They're perfectly harmless. But one of those would start crawling along the part of the forest floor that my eyes were resting on as I was meditating. That distraction is a lot less distracting and a lot less potentially damaging to your meditation than a car going by with a loud stereo. Because the car and the loud stereo are trying to sell you something. The millipede does not want anything from you at all. The mosquitoes, maybe, but not the millipede.
It's kind of going off on a tangent, but it reminded me of something interesting. Another documentary that I worked on, we were interviewing a bunch of old people about what it was like to grow up in like a small farming community in like the 40s. And a lot of these places didn't have TV until like later. Like they got TV way later than the rest of the country. And I thought something interesting that they said was that a lot of the interesting, unique characters in their community kind of disappeared once TV came into the fold.
Right.
So everybody had to like homogenize.
Exactly. And even radio. I've been a giant radio geek my whole life, and I've always been fascinated with that era where radio was our main entertainment. And even radio, if that's on in the room, the people in the room are knitting, or they're doing something else. They're still kind of outside of the radio, and they're still kind of interacting with one another. They're looking at each other. If you look at pictures, photographs of people listening to the radio in like the 30s, they're facing each other and looking at each other. And the radio's over here. And television sucks everything into itself. Computers do that too, suck everything into themselves, so you're not paying attention to anything that's outside of that device, including other people.
Mm-hmm. I think they notice that when everybody's watching the same program and everybody's watching the same characters, you try to like emulate those people.
Yeah, and that can be difficult because those are fictional characters, and they've been drawn to accomplish a certain very limited task. Whereas you and I are living in the real world where morality and ethics are much more complex, and and things aren't resolved at the end of a half an hour or an hour. And all of your friends haven't forgotten what you did and said yesterday when the show starts again tomorrow. And I do think that television has done a number on, and movies have done a number on the way that we see the world. I particularly see that today in right-wing politics, where their notions of how to fix what's wrong with the world are things like build a wall, shoot people. That's the problem, is we aren't waging enough war in enough other countries, and that you learn that from movies. This always got me, even when I was a kid. In the movie, some guy has a bunch of trouble and somebody is picking on him, somebody is endangering him, and finally at the end of the movie he pulls out his gun and he shoots that guy dead. And everybody in the movies goes, right on! And the credits roll. And in real life, you don't shoot somebody and walk away, even if the courts decide, as they rarely do, that was a good killing and they don't throw you in prison. You're going to have to be going to court for a long, long time. You're going to have to deal with all the people that love that man, that are mad at you for having done that. And I think a lot of people whose worldviews are not very broad can be suckered by those action movies into thinking, well, that's the way it should be in the world. That's how you solve problems. As a Zenner, I still may enjoy an action movie, although frankly, since I started practicing Zen, I'm less and less interested in them because they're faker and faker to me. But okay, I'll watch an action movie. I'll watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or I used to when it was still on, and I can enjoy it on the level that I realize it's all nonsense. You know what I mean? It's fun to watch what these writers have written and what these actors are performing, but they don't influence my sense of right and wrong, or my sense of how to get things done, nearly as much as they did before.
Mm-hmm. I've actually noticed on the hike, when we get into town, we stay at a hotel or something and watch TV or movies, that it was like kind of a nice escape from reality.
Yeah.
Because on the trail there was so much reality that we were encountering, and it was just kind of overwhelming at times.
Oh yeah, I had the same experience. On Ango. I purposely didn't bring anything out there to read. I obviously didn't have any kind of screen at all out there. I allowed myself one distraction and then I forgot it and left it at home. I allowed myself my harmonica. And when I got out there and looked through my baggage and realized it wasn't there, oh, geez. And the immediacy of 100 straight days of meditation is exhausting. That's when I realized how relaxing TV is. Just 15 minutes of a YouTube video, on, I don't know, how to cook something, is 15 minutes that you're not in your own life. And it's like, oh, thank God. And that was one of the things I learned at Ango when I first got there. Like I was there for about a week. I was reading the tube of toothpaste to have something to read. And fortunately, I had my journal. So I journaled a lot out there. And that was a way of accompanying myself, of providing some relief to the loneliness, to have somebody to talk to, even if it was just me. And it was a way of pulling myself out of this immediacy that I was constantly in. But it's just like you say, that's where I realized that TV is relaxing. It's one of those interesting situations that on the one hand pumps you up and energizes you and makes you kind of frenetic, but on the other hand relaxes you from having to deal with your own life, which is a bummer.
I think that's a really good point that I haven't really thought of before, is that TV especially is kind of just a way to not be in your own life.
Right. Reading is that way. Reading is a way to not be in your own life. Yeah.
But there's definitely been an increase of people trying to not be in their own life, I think, recently.
It's addictive. Yeah, it's addictive.
Why do you think that is?
Difficult, and it's a little frightening. if we have to sit in a room with ourselves, which is what I do, and think about all the things we could be doing now instead of sitting on the cushion. There's another old piece of Zen wisdom, which is really good, that says that like 90% of practice is just convincing yourself to stay sitting down. And that's true. I mean, sometimes there's things like, I forgot to turn the oven off, and then I'll get up and go turn the oven off. But it really is true. A, you got to convince yourself to sit in the first place, because I got all these other things I have to do. You say, yeah, well, sitting is what we do. And I have this argument all the time, and I don't always win. But it's, we're sitting, sit down. Well, I was supposed to make bread today, and I didn't make bread. Well, too bad, sit down. And I have this argument with myself a lot. Then you sit down, and there's, I don't know, it kind of hurts. My hip is hurting. I got bursitis. My hip is hurting. And gosh, oh, there was that email I was supposed to write that I didn't write. And then I have to convince myself to stay put. And that's because I don't want to live with all these things that I know I'm supposed to do that I haven't done, that I should have done. And we don't want to do that. So we want to be in a place where someone else is driving, whoever made the TV show, whoever read the book or wrote the book. Someone else is driving, and all we have to do is just follow along.
Okay, let's get to your retreat now.
Sure.
So can you just kind of walk me through the process of how you even made that decision to do this in the first place?
It happened very soon after I started practicing Zen. I realized that I wanted to, because I've been a person who's spent as much time in the outback as possible in my life. It's always been kind of my impulse is to get out, away, into natural settings. And after I started practicing Zen, I understood partly why that was. Part of it was a desire to get away, but after I practiced Zen, I realized there's also something I wanted to go to. Part of it was taking refuge, and part of it was coming into something that I wanted to do. And as I was reading a lot about the early days of Buddhism, which is what I was really interested in, I'm reading that these guys were doing that that's what Buddhism was in those days. And I could totally understand it from having had what I now realize were meditative experiences in the outback. I was being pulled, basically I've been handed this tool of Zazen. It said, this is what you needed that whole time. Now go out there and do this. And the Buddha was telling me to go out there and do that. And I had the example of other hermits to go out there and do that. And Christ did it for 40 years or for 40 days in the desert. This is what you want to do. So I started kind of planning it at that point to do it. There was a Korean Zen teacher named Sung San, who just died a couple of years ago, who was one of the few recent Zenners that I know of who did that. He went and did he did 100 days on the mountain in Korea, and then he immigrated to the States and became eventually the leader of the Los Angeles Zen Center. But Sung San's teachings are really important to me. I read a lot of his teachings. He made a lot of sense to me. Like me, he's a little bit nuts, and so I kind of understood that. And so it was especially his example that led me to want to do it. That backed up by the scriptural background and the eremitical, the human eremitical tradition.
I think I went through a similar process, just going into nature. At first, I think I was doing it to escape mostly, because very much an introvert, didn't have a lot of friends, and didn't really have a lot to do with my time. And I liked being outside, so I would just go do that. But the more time I spent out there, the more I was actually going out there for something, and actually finding some positive benefit to it too.
Yeah, I had noticed many times as I got older that when things weren't going too well for me and I was not feeling very good about my life in general, if I would go out and spend a whole day out in some open place where there weren't many people, I could feel the uptick in my spirits and my sense of, I can do this, I can handle this, whatever this problem is, I'll be okay. And then at a certain point, I started to tell myself, in my late 20s, I started to tell myself, Rob, this is what you need to be doing. Because you come out here because now you know that you'll feel better when you've done this, and you'll feel hopeful again, and you'll feel positive about the future, which is all true. I went out there feeling very negative about the future. The other day I came back feeling positive, exhausted but positive. So I said, well, so you need to live in a place like this. You need to be out here all the time. And then eventually I came around to understanding that I've basically been a Zenner all my life and not really understood what was calling me. And I didn't really understand what I was until I started practicing Zen, and I thought, oh great, this is what I am. I understand. It doesn't have to be Zen, by the way. A lot of religions have this same tradition. There's a contemplative tradition in Christianity, for example. I was really close to the Franciscans for a while because there wasn't a Zen center in the area, and I sat with Franciscans. And what they're doing is very similar to Zen. There's the Sufis in Islam. You know, there's a lot of this going around the world, but in my case, what did it for me was Zen.
That's the end of part 1 of our conversation with Robin Henderson. There was so much to explore, we knew we couldn't fit it all into one episode. Stick around. Part 2 is up next, and we dive even deeper into his life as a Zen hermit monk. And don't forget, to learn more about Robin, we will leave a link in the description.
If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to subscribe, where you'll find a lot of videos that have similar themes.